For as long as I can remember, I have been a storyteller. It's a skill that I learned at an early age, something that was part of my identity before I held my first pen. And my teacher was my grandfather. He had a way of making every story he told me entertaining and exciting. He would sit me down on the couch, scratch the top of his bald head, and pull a book from the bookcase. His living room smelt like a combination of apple pie and his workshop that sat behind the house, and I would latch onto his every word, laughing at the voices he made up for every character. I didn't realize it then, but he was becoming my inspiration. I was so determined to be just like him and share my own stories in a creative way that I would sit for hours, clutching picture books before I could even read, my tiny face pressed deep in those pages until day turned into night. But as it turned out, I didn't start reading or writing until I was 8 years old. My journey to this point was unexpectedly riddled with anxiety that had started my second day of kindergarten. The truth is, I didn't realize that there was a world outside the four walls of my home. There was so much comfort in spending my days with my parents that when my dad dropped me off that first day of school, I panicked, clinging to his arm like a life raft that would save me. It didn't feel fair to me how easily the other kids ran to play without worry as their parents walked out the door. I made him promise he would pick me up on time and sat, shaking, in the corner of the classroom. This continued for 3 to 4 weeks until I felt comfortable letting him leave with the other parents. However, if he was even a minute late, my hysterics would return and we would start from scratch. It wasn't just the drop-off either. It seemed like the smallest things would send me spiraling. Over time, I did find ways to enjoy some of my time at school. Running around the playground, climbing trees, and finger painting flowers. I was, naturally, a very happy kid, but the anxiety was always there. As my first year of school passed, I started longing for an outlet. Eventually, I picked up a few crayons one day in my classroom and wrote my first poem. It was about the changing seasons. The words were jumbled and spelled wrong, but the second I handed it to my grandpa that afternoon, he smiled and hung it up on his wall, praising me. That was the moment I realized this was what I wanted to do. This was how I wanted to express myself. But a few years later, I hit a wall. The anxiety overtook me. Even during happy moments, I clung to my mom's leg in fear or buried my face in a pillow to stop the noise inside my head. The noise was constant, a beating drum right behind my temples that almost never stopped. Now, I'll be honest. Being a kid with anxiety isn't the worst thing. Even therapy rooms and counselors became a part of my daily routine. They had me line up toys, draw my feelings, and read books. It was all pretty great, until I grew up. Let me give you some insight into the person that I used to be. I've always been the girl who gives until there's nothing left. I spent the first 17 years of my life doing things for other people before doing anything for myself. This meant that I endured a lot of abuse without meaning to, because when people knew I'd be there no matter what, they treated me like I was disposable. One day in late July, I did one of the stupidest things I've ever done. I had my dad drop me off at a park to meet a boy. This boy was 19, tall, strong, and blonde. I was terrified. But the idea of him wanting me was enough to make me go. He grabbed my hand and we walked the 11 blocks to his house. I counted every one as his grip grew tighter. I sat on his pale yellow couch and realized we were all alone. In between rough kisses, I came to the conclusion that if he wanted to, he could rape me. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that I had put myself here. My choice to let my fear and anxiety win had put me right here, and I was utterly alone. My lack of self-care put me in many dangerous situations like this one. I followed my friends willingly into parties thrown by men twice our age. I drank anything that was handed to me, and I stole underwear from the Macy's at the mall to appear cool. When people talked about me, they always had one thing to say. Grace is so nice. But what they meant was I was compliant, bending to their will whenever they needed a favor. My stress levels were off the chart, but I did my best to hide it. My solution for this was to push it all down. When I reached my 17th birthday, I decided I would be done with anxiety. I came up with a plan to help me just forget about it, and when I felt myself getting stressed, I chose to just ignore it. Then we moved to Bali. I had lived in Portland, Oregon my entire life. It was a place of comfort for me. I knew it well and loved it. My family was there, and I had created a great group of friends in my sophomore year. The move scared me. I spent the first 2 weeks in our villa bawling my eyes out. It was the first time in a while that I had felt completely lost. The more I pushed down the anxiety, the worse it seemed to get. I had spent so much of my life trying to please people while battling mental illness that I had lost my voice and confidence. This resulted in a bad habit that I honestly hate to talk about. The stress had welled up so much in my stomach that I no longer felt hungry. I started only eating a meal a day, and as I lost weight, I felt validated, which relieved some of the pain. I was constantly complimented on something that wasn't healthy, so I continued. This meant that I needed to get all of my jeans fitted to my new waist as I struggled to focus and stay awake. I was sinking fast, and I needed a way out. I found that escape in my first poetry class at Greenstone. The class I took was unlike anything I had ever experienced before. We were able to do most of our writing outside in nature. For me, this couldn't have been more perfect. When I was outside in silence, I experienced a sense of calm that helped me focus. I couldn't stop writing. I created almost 30 poems that block and gained inspiration from the students who loved to create like I did. I was confident again, knowing that people liked to read my work. There were many times that year when I would sit outside my tiny Joe-Glow with a pen clutched in my hand, writing poems for this class that I loved so much while I thought about my grandfather. I always wondered what he was doing at that moment, who he was telling his stories to in my absence. I emailed him my writing, waiting nervously for his response, and he sent me back photos of my old poems, still tacked to his wall, rooting for me from a distance. Writing freed me. It took me out of my head. Through this journey, I was able to discover my voice. I shed layers of self-doubt and blossomed into a completely new person. I am excited to return home after graduating. I can't wait to see the look on my grandpa's face when I hand him my book full of poems. I can already imagine his smile while he flips through the pages. Now, I want to share a poem with all of you. I'd like to send a message to the golden girl who speaks and watches honey drip from her lips, because I know the ins and outs of her mind, how every emotion is a color that burns down to her core and reaches her fingertips. I know how she struggles in dark rooms behind closed doors to turn her feelings into words, her heart as thin as cobwebs, unable to protect itself from letting everyone in. She has played the game of life long enough to know how to read a room and fill it with soft light. I want to whisper in her ear that there is strength in her stillness. There is strength in her kindness. She doesn't need to fight how she feels anymore. She is safe with her jar of honey and her pencils. Thank you.